How old was Adam when God created him?
To either one of your opinions.
Like
When
one,
he died or when he?
No,
One-
Adam, when he was created.
he'd be 1 second old. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, boom. There he is.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that 1 second. He was a grown man, but how old was he?
You know, I am a literalist, or I do take the Bible as history. I think that Adam and Eve were actual people created by God in the Garden of Eden, and so I would say that he was young adult probably. I don't think God created a baby and then watched him grow. It was, he created a man. I would assume a young man, late teens, early 20s if I had to guess, but we're just not told.
Yeah.
All the pictures you see of him, middle-aged,
Yeah,
young man.
so that's about where I would say that. But honestly, the Bible just doesn't tell us. But it doesn't make sense to me that God would create a child. And with long life ahead of him,
But
I'm
you know,
pretty
how
sure.
long did he live in the garden before he was? Well, never mind.
Someone else want to get that? Because I'm not sure my answer is church appropriate.
I don't know what that means, but
Yeah.
it just doesn't say. I would say, first off, when Adam was created, he was created old enough to procreate, because that's the first commandment of the Lord, right? Go and go multiply and be fruitful after he created Eve. But as far as the time in the garden, it could have been hundreds of years. I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
You know,
here's
because time was irrelevant in the garden, right? Because we weren't created to die. So we're talking, there were eternity, and then the apple or the fruit, and then all of a sudden we're not eternal. And so when you're trying to, at least for my minimal knowledge, when you're trying to compare eternity to all of a sudden now death enters the world, it's hard to say. And if their bodies were created in the eternal, in the glorified sense, we'll say, like when Jesus was resurrected in the glorified body, if their bodies were glorified, for lack of a better term, then they probably wouldn't have aged. They wouldn't have decayed.
Well, the other part of that question is, do you believe that the tree of Eden is still alive and still in existence?
no.
No.
Going back to the first one, let me just say, and we're all grown-ups here. As he said, what was the command that God gave them? Right? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. There is no sin, but they're told to go have children. And the Bible describes them as being naked and not ashamed. But we know they did not have children until after they sinned. How long do you think that lasted before they started having kids? So chances are it was pretty quick, because there were no kids conceived, in the perfect state. So I'm assuming it was pretty quick after, they didn't spend long in the garden, would be my guess. It's a guess, but that's my logic how I get there.
Okay.
Regarding the tree, is it still there?
Somewhat.
I wouldn't think so. Seems to me the flood would have taken care of that. It's one that's really funny, because I remember as a kid, you'd see these articles and these things about, where is Eden? And they're looking at the names of rivers and, Mesopotamia, probably somewhere over in Iraq, and maybe it's this place, and this guy thinks it's this place. It would have been just demolished in the flood. We have no idea where Eden would be. It'd just be gone. So,
But if you take the Bible literal, it's somewhere between the Euphrates and the Tigris, because that's two of the four rivers that are named.
or those rivers that we have now were named after the rivers
Oh,
that
well,
would have
now we're
existed
getting,
pre-flood.
now we're getting into biblical reliability.
So now it's,
Can you take the Bible reliable then?
well, it wasn't wrong. It's just, different rivers, same name.
Sure.
Because it
I'm
couldn't
not
have
arguing. I mean,
It couldn't
where
have
the
been
Garden
the
of
same.
Eden was is irrelevant to me. I just believe it was there. Could have been in Africa for all I know.
Have you ever heard of the Israel Project? I think that's the name of it. They're digging for oil somewhere that you can invest in the company. They're digging for oil. I guess oil comes from rich,
Decayed
decayed.
matter.
And so if they find it, it's gonna be a big fine, and the Israeli people
They're,
or
they're
there's a company from Texas, I think. that's-
invested, they're looking for the Garden of
would be
Eden.
a company
so
from
it's gonna be all top.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be
It's
big.
gonna be the biggest oil reserve they've ever found.
Right. That's a whole lot of speculation.
Yeah, you're
So the mo-
we're
they're
speculating
doing
on
it in Israel?
speculation there. That's
Yeah.
not gonna be going good. But, if it's here, it's hidden very well, because like Mark said, in the flood, it then, and the names that were mentioned, but those rivers haven't been found, and so that's, and that one's gonna have to stay out there ambiguous.
I don't know how long you want to spend there, but would you, I don't think we have any reason to believe that Adam and Eve were standing in Israel, right? I mean, you have Adam and Eve, you have their offspring, you have the flood, you have the starting over. At some point, there's somewhere else, and then they're in Egypt, and then they come into the promised land, right? And my understanding is not that the promised land is, and now you're returning to that, however many acre plot of land that Adam and Eve were in the garden. In fact, I would kind of be surprised at that being consistent with the banishment narrative without them being told that they're overcoming that. This is all speculative, but if I'm looking for Eden, I'm actually probably not looking in modern day Israel or.
Some people think that. Some people do say this is God's land, this is the holy land, the promised land, so this is where it would have been.
Okay.
But I don't know any reason to connect those dots.
Yeah.
Because according to, I mean, of course, depending on how one takes, Genesis, but according to, the flood, I mean, the topography was just reshaped.
That's true.
Nothing would look the same anymore. So how would you even know where to look?
Yeah.
And
Well, and all of God's activity before Israel really came on the scene was outside of what we know as the promised land. Abraham wasn't from Israel. Noah wasn't from Israel. Matter of fact, they think the ark is in Turkey. That's where Mount Ararat is. I mean, Israel, what we know as Israel only becomes important when Moses goes back into Egypt and God says, that's the promised land. Before that, all of God's activity is in the Middle East, Asia Minor, all that, to our best knowledge.
Yeah.
We're also talking about prehistory.
Yeah.
So it's a good mind-numbing example of just studying, and it's fun.
It's located in East Texas, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, like you
if you're
said,
Mormon, it
with the
was
topography, the shape of the earth changing,
Really?
right, this is where a lot people would believe this is where we got our modern continents and stuff. It talks about, valleys breaking apart and the foundations of the earth breaking. So, yeah, maybe there's a tree somewhere, and maybe, if the earth is like, 60, 70% water, and things are breaking apart and sinking and falling, yeah, maybe there's a tree standing somewhere in the bottom of the Atlantic, and maybe the sword's still there too, I wonder about that sometimes. You said there was a sword to guard the garden. Maybe it got destroyed in the flood, or maybe it's still there, and it's at the corner of some mountain somewhere, or at some crevice of the ocean that we haven't seen. We're talking about a speck on this earth that was radically reshaped at least once right after that.
And even if someone holds to a regional flood, that area of civilization that got flooded, it was wiped out.
Yep.
I mean, so whether someone thinks global or regional, it's going to be the same. I think it would be the same answer either way. It's just gone.
Yeah.
So, but it's always fun to kind of chase those rabbit trails on those kind of.
I agree.
And might I throw this caveat out there theologically? If it's gone, it's because God thinks it's gone. For me, it's gone because God thinks that's what's best for us.
Yeah.
Because we would be the numbskulls that would try to find it, and then that angel with the flaming sword would have to kill us. So,
Or we probably end up worshiping it. That's kind of the pattern of human history. Someone would have found it and someone would have worshipped it.
It's Mecca.
right.
Yeah.
It would have. That's what it would have been. And here's another thing. Remember, Eden was the place where God communed with mankind. It was where, as one author I read put it, where heaven and earth intersected, where God walked with man. Well, where does that happen now?
In spirit.
Right? We don't need an Eden.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason for God to have preserved it because the mission, the project of God relating with man moved on to something else. And so.
I mean, the love of God in that story is amazing because it wasn't just two people that were banished from the garden. God also banished himself in a sense. He went with them. He went with humanity. He didn't go, y'all are out, and he stayed back. He's you see his actions through humanity all throughout. It's not like he stayed in paradise and was like, yep, forget y'all, you know?
That was the beginning of all the separation,
Yeah.
you know, and it just continued.